We're back with the football podcast. We're going to be talking about one question every NFL team must answer in 2025.
Yeah, so before we get started with that, though, let's talk about the probably biggest piece of news that we've had in the last few weeks that broke immediately after we recorded our previous episode. So we're a little late to the game here, but of course it's the trade between the Steelers and the Dolphins, where the Dolphins send safety Jalen Ramsey and tight end Jonnu Smith alongside a 2027 7th-round pick in order to receive Minkah Fitzpatrick and a 2027 5th-round pick from the Steelers. What are your immediate thoughts?
Yeah, so first off, to clarify, Jalen Ramsey is a cornerback, but
fair.
regardless of that point, my immediate thoughts are that the Dolphins are cleaning up the books, which is good. They're saving a bunch of money through this move. I would imagine that Minkah Fitzpatrick is probably not going to be there for long, which in my mind is a good thing for the Dolphins. In fact, last episode, we talked about whether or not the Dolphins should rebuild or keep going. And so this is definitely a sign in the direction of a rebuild. That being said, for the Steelers, it's one of those things where I think that the Steelers defense as a whole got better this offseason. This move, I'm not exactly sure or confident in any direction. Like anything I would tell you would not necessarily be in full confidence, whether or not I think this made the Steelers better. But I think when you put it into context, the move makes sense. So first off, Jalen Ramsey gives them a lot of flexibility on the defense. And last year, they were the highest graded defense. They had the highest graded defensive lineman line group according to PFF when it comes to like pass rush efficiency and things of that nature. But their secondary was very terrible, or was pretty terrible. Their, I guess, star corner Joey Porter Jr. had an atrocious season last year comparatively, and so bringing in Darius Slay, bringing in Jalen Ramsey, and then an underrated move, Juan Thornhill, which really allowed them to even make this move and kind of use Minkah Fitzpatrick to get Jalen Ramsey. I think as a whole, their defense is going to be better. I think their secondary obviously is going to be better, especially when you compare it to last year. And so, yeah, like I think this move makes a lot of sense for the Steelers.
Yeah, the way that I would say it from the Steelers' perspective is it is looking at the move, the place where it's going to make the most sense is just purely the 2025 NFL season, which is the only season that they care about right now. And that's not to say that that's a smart decision, but they've put all their chips in on Aaron Rodgers and this one season. I mean, that's the messaging that's being put out by pretty much everyone. Some blatantly saying it, like Aaron Rodgers. Mike Tomlin, isn't going to come out and say we only care, or I mean, he would say we take this game by game, but they're not planning the entire franchise just based off of this one season. But they also really kind of are. And so when you look at from that perspective, we have to mention the addition of Jonnu Smith is very much something to tag team with Pat Freiermuth. So the tight end room gets better. The cornerback room as a whole, with all of the moves plus now Jalen Ramsey, gets better. I don't know how you could look at this and say that the Steelers are getting worse heading into 2025.
Yeah, the question with all these moves is really just, is it actually beneficial in the long run for the Steelers to get better? Because if you remember back to the offseason grading portion, it was like our first episode. I gave the Steelers like a D because to that point, Aaron Rodgers wasn't signed. This move hasn't happened. And in my mind, it was just kind of a big question mark and a reluctance to rebuild, which is really what they need to do in order to get a franchise guy, unless Will Campbell steps up. Or not Will Campbell. Will Campbell. Who did they pick up? Will Howard. And so basically, this definitely increases the grade to like a C plus, including the Aaron Rodgers move, maybe even a B minus. The reason why you would look at this and kind of this whole offseason and the negative spin of it is basically they still do not have the offensive weapons or the offensive coordinator to compete with the top teams in the AFC.
No.
And because of that, it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, sure, you're going all in for 2025.
Exactly.
But that is not really going to lead to any meaningful change. It's still a wild card exit. And, best case scenario, a divisional round exit. And so that's kind of the negative spin on it. That being said, I will say this kind of seems to me like the front office, without explicitly saying it, they're kind of implying that this year is almost Mike Tomlin's last chance. And that this is kind of this regime, kind of this era of football's last chance before maybe they potentially start fully rebuilding.
Maybe.
Which
what a way
it just
to
seems
remember Mike Tomlin by.
I know, right? Yeah, it just kind of seems like that's kind of the direction they're going. I feel like, especially compared to offseason in the past, this is the most aggressive that they've been. And so I don't know. That is like a total theory that's based on nothing, really. It just seems to make sense.
That's probably a part of it. It's not saying that it's 100% certain, but I think the combination of owners, clearly multiple owners in the NFL, really like the taste of the Aaron Rodgers Kool-Aid. Plus, from the Steelers organizational perspective, it's okay, we're going to finally provide the resources to go all in for a season. And Mike Tomlin, show us what you got. We're giving you what probably isn't necessarily true, but what they would view in their minds as the best roster that they've had post Ben Roethlisberger.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's why it kind of seems like one of those situations where the front office is moving as if this is their last chance. Yeah. And so there haven't been any reports saying that, and it's almost implied with the Aaron Rodgers move, not because it's not because of his financials that like pigeonholes them, but I do think it's a situation where it's like they're gonna have to get another quarterback unless Will Howard steps up next year or whatever. Like they're gonna have to do something after 2025. And, that puts into question a lot of things related to like TJ Watt, for example, because, he's also not really happy with his current contract. And so, they don't really have a lot of flexibility outside of, sell high on their best guys. And unless they make a Super Bowl, and then it's almost inevitable that they'll kind of have to. So yeah, it's one of those situations where we might be kind of seeing the end of an era if this Steelers season goes how I would expect.
Which, like I said earlier, what a way for Mike Tomlin to go out with Jalen Ramsey, Aaron Rodgers,
DK Metcalf.
Metcalf. What a weird assembled cast and crew that could be his last ride.
And as a Bengals fan, I'm not particularly a big fan of the Steelers, but I will say, what a storyline if they can make it happen.
Absolutely true. Well, we will go ahead and discuss potentially another older player, not as old as Aaron Rodgers, who might not have that much left in the tank. I wanted to bring up Christian McCaffrey. The reason for this is because ESPN fantasy rankings came out the other day. I'm perusing, and Christian McCaffrey is dropped down to like the 5th or 6th running back off the board. And I found myself seeing that, and my first instinct wasn't, wow, he's running RB5 or 6. It's, wow, he's actually higher than I expected him to be. Does Christian McCaffrey ever reach the heights that he did in the 2023 NFL season ever again?
So that is a tough question because I think that context is really important when you look at that season as a whole and the 49ers as a whole. So obviously you had that situation where, and we talked about this when we talked about the grades for the 49ers, where their defense was doing a lot of heavy lifting. And, time of possession is a stat that not a lot of people look at, but is incredibly meaningful. One thing that I always like to look at and say is like, when you look at a couple of things. There's really only a couple stats outside of the score, obviously, that you can use to determine like if a team won. Like 99% of the time, these are the stats that will indicate it. The first one is turnovers, and the second one is time of possession. Generally, if you win the turnover battle and if you win the time of possession battle, you're going to win the game. And
Yes.
so from that perspective, you know, like they won the time of possession battle. They won the turnover battle, and they had, you know, obviously Brock Purdy on an incredibly cheap rookie deal, the best contract in sports. They had this incredible defense that was really anchoring that team. And then obviously you talk about the scheme with Shanahan that and the weapons, you know, you had Deebo Samuel almost, you know, a little bit, I guess, past his prime. It wasn't his best season, but he was still incredibly effective. Brandon Ayuk, that was kind of the year where he earned that contract, you know, whether or not you think he really did. You know, George Kittle was firing on all cylinders. Their offensive line was incredible. And so like all of that leads to, it makes sense that Christian McCaffrey would be able to have a season like that. The 49ers, it just doesn't seem like they're in a position to be able to, I guess you could say, put a team together that actually allows him to be maximized fully. That being said, I do think that Christian McCaffrey still has the ability to play like he did in 2023, whether or not that actually leads to, you know, the stat line that he had in that season.
I think I agree. I think a little bit, everything of what you said is true, and I think still there's a little bit of the burying the lead with the injury concerns, you know? I mean, he's coming off of, and that's something that has plagued him his whole career, and it feels like he fought through that to get to the 2023 NFL season that he had, and then with all of the, and it's not some conspiracy theory or anything like that, there was quite a bit more with his health going on behind the scenes than was let on, with really basically it seemed like every single part of his leg. Anything below Christian McCaffrey's waist is a question mark at this point. And so when you have that, it just kind of throws a monkey wrench into everything, because even if he's able to have the same type of production in individual games, it's how many games is he going to be able to play? Especially when you talk about a postseason run alongside that, because you're not just talking about a full NFL season or 15 of the 17 games, but then you're trying to tack on 2-3 more games on top of that. And so when you're approaching with a guy with his injury concern, a 20-game season in terms of games played, I have significant doubts. I also think that one of Christian McCaffrey's biggest assets, something that separates him even more, separates him from Saquon Barkley, not that he's better than, but it's certainly a layer and wrinkle that he has to his game, is how much he can work out of the backfield in terms of catching passes.
Which is his superpower with fantasy. That's why he blew everyone out of the water in that season.
Which is probably why he's still as high as he is at that 5th or 6th spot, especially if you're playing in a PPR league. But but part of what predicates his ability to be able to do that is the explosiveness to be able to catch the ball behind the line of scrimmage and just immediately burst upfield. Yeah. And that's only going to diminish at this point in his career. So I have it's not that we're never going to see even another good Christian McCaffrey season. I have my doubts that we see another great one, which is objectively a sad thing.
Yeah. I think that, you know, if from a fantasy perspective, which we haven't really given much fantasy advice, but from a fantasy perspective, he's one of those guys where it's like, so for example, in our league, since I won last year, I'm going to be picking last. So I have that last pick in the first round, first pick in the second round. He is one of those guys that I could potentially consider picking around that spot. I think that from a fantasy perspective, he is like a really great flex. If you, and especially with the parity in the wide receiver market that it seems to be, where it's like there's a bunch of guys getting a bunch of receptions. it seems to me like that actually kind of makes sense that he would be like the potentially 5th, maybe even 6th running back within it. Because in my mind, when I look at Christian McCaffrey, I think that he still has the potential to be RB1 when it comes to fantasy points specifically. Maybe
That's
he's
fair.
not the best running back in the league, but I still think he has the potential. The scheme is still there. I think that I think a lot of what happened last season and the reason why, because if you remember, it was one of those things where it's like, is he going to start? We don't know. If is he going to play at all? We don't know. And a lot of that had to do with just like them really holding him back, I guess you could say. I think that he could have played, but they were just nervous about it. And it was one of those situations where it's like, let's be better safe than sorry. And so from that perspective, from a fantasy only perspective, he is someone that I would consider drafting pretty early, I guess you could say, just because I think he still has that potential. I think that in terms of pure talent, he is a top 3 running back within the NFL. That injury concern is what pushes him back 3 to 4 spots.
Mm-hmm.
And so
absolutely fair.
It's gonna be interesting to see for sure. I don't know. I guess we'll just have to find out. I hope that we can still have that we can have a Christian McCaffrey season like that. Like, I'm not a 49ers fan or anything, but just like for the sake of entertainment and the conversations and the discourse between like Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry, Christian McCaffrey will just be great.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, why don't we go ahead and get into our main topic for today's show? We're going to be, for every single NFL team, all 32, the one question that needs to be answered will be answered. It's sort of just one question up for interpretation for every NFL team. We're going to be going division at a time, so I'll be going back and forth between the AFC West, AFC East, and the NFC West and the NFC East, and Adam will be taking the North and South. So Adam, if you want to start us off with your first division.
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about the AFC North first. So starting off with the team that won the AFC North last year, the Ravens, and a lot of these questions are kind of obvious. So for the Ravens, It's just, can Lamar Jackson have his best game in the playoffs and not his worst game?
Which is a struggle
one thing
for
to clarify, it is. He's really only done it one time. So the thing is, and it wasn't even really his best game, but the thing is, when I'm looking at this, I'm looking at what is their ceiling coming into 2025, and we graded the off seasons, and that really helped us kind of determine what the team ceilings are. And then just like, what is the one, if we were to boil down everything into one question that they have to answer in order to reach that ceiling, what is that question? And so for the Ravens, I think undoubtedly this is the question that has to be asked. Can Lamar Jackson step up when it matters most, when he's playing those top teams in the AFC? Because so far he hasn't been able to best them. Just looking at the stats, he has a record of 3-5 in the playoffs. His completion percentage drops from 64.9 in the regular season to 60.9 in the playoffs. He has 7 interceptions and 7 fumbles, and he has a turnover in every single game that he's lost. And then, like you said, pretty much every year except for last year where he's lost in the playoffs, his worst game was that loss. And so really it's just a question of, can Lamar Jackson elevate enough to win a playoff game?
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't really know if there's really anything to add. That one's pretty simple.
That's all it is.
Okay. There we go. So should I continue with the AFC North, or do you want to start with one of your teams?
You go through the whole division.
Sounds good. Okay, next is the Bengals. Again, really, really simple. Will their defense be able to stop anyone from doing anything? And I think that this question is really just predicated upon what happens with Trey Hendrickson. I have come to the point where I think that they're going to sign him. It kind of seems like it's the same pattern over and over again with, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, where it's like this reluctancy, and then at the last minute they finally cave. It kind of seems like that's what's going on. It's kind of following the same storyline. In my opinion,
as we've said a million times, as compared to the T. Higgins one, which I wouldn't have done, no matter what the drama is, you have to sign Trey Hendrickson.
You have to. And here's why. So this is the Bengals rankings in key defensive stats without Trey Hendrickson on the field over the last 2 seasons. They are 32nd in pressure percentage, 32nd in completion percentage, 32nd in success percentage, and 32nd in passer rating. And they're top 12 in every single one of those stats when Trey Hendrickson is on the field.
Yeah, you have to sign him.
He's low key. Like, I know that most like MVP like has context to it, but if you were just to like interpret it word for word, most valuable player, Trey Hendrickson might be the most valuable player in the NFL. When you look at those stats, it is absolutely ridiculous. So you have to sign him, and then you have to hope that Al Golden can just elevate the team with a more simplistic scheme, and then some other guys in the secondary, Josh Newton, Dax Hill, DJ Turner, can just step up, right? Cam Taylor-Britt, all of those guys, can they just step up? Yeah, that's kind of it. Because if they can stop teams to under 30 points, the Bengals have a good chance of winning every single game on Sunday. And if they can make it to the playoffs one-on-one, I started looking at the stats, and so far, Joe Burrow has pretty much every time he's played the 3 other quarterbacks in his tier, that being Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes, and Josh Allen, he's outplayed them on a game-to-game basis. And so literally every time, like every single time they've played, when you just compare the stat lines, it's like, yeah, Joe Burrow had a better stat line. And so it's just one of those things where it's like, if the defense can be top 15, we're looking at Super Bowl hopes. And if not, we're looking at missing the playoffs.
Yep, 100%.
Yeah. Okay, talking about the Steelers, we just discussed the Steelers a little bit. It's really just, can their offense be in the top half of the league? Again, it's not that high of a bar, but when we look at it, and Arthur Smith specifically, and I talked about this when we graded their offseason, but his offenses have ranked bottom 10 in scoring in 3 of the 4 last season. So it's just like, last year they had some troubles with the offensive line. I don't think their offensive line is going to get better. They've lost their best weapon. They replaced him with DK Metcalf, which I think,
the more
I think about it,
better weapon.
I don't know, man. I think so too when you add it to context.
At worst, in my opinion, it's a lateral move.
Sure. I think that's fair. I think that, but I think like, I don't know, George Pickens is just really good, especially like as a deep threat. So we'll see.
Yes.
Obviously,
the problem
Jonnu
is
Smith
that's kind of the only
bit.
facet of his game that excites you.
True. That's a good point. So, they have the new offense, DK Metcalf. Jalen Warren is probably going to step up, who I think has been one of the best backups in football since Najee Harris has left. Aaron Rodgers. So we'll see, but that's really the question they have to ask. Their defense is going to be better. Their pass rush is going to be amazing. Might have, again, the best pass rush in the league. But if their offense can be top 15, if their offense can be top 10, top 5, then we're actually talking about real contenders.
Yes, absolutely. And you're not, and ultimately, when we look back on the season, it is going to come down to quarterback play because, of course, it always does. And Aaron Rodgers is the storyline. But once we actually see it play out on the field, there will potentially be legitimate criticism of the weapons that he has as well. Although, the weapons of DK Metcalf and Pat Freiermuth and Jonnu Smith and other pieces around it, and a running game that's probably going to be decently strong.
Yeah.
All of the pieces are there to be an average to above average NFL offense.
And it's not even the pieces that I really have a problem with. It's just the offense that Arthur Smith runs. And so that's really the question, where it's like,
fair.
Can he? Because, I would say probably looking back on it, the most success that Arthur Smith offense has ever had was the year that the Titans made it or won the AFC. And that was coming off the back of Derrick Henry, probably Derrick Henry's best season. And so, sure, with Derrick Henry, and A.J. Brown, that works. Will it work with DK Metcalf, Aaron Rodgers, and Jalen Warren? And, the biggest drop off there, because arguably, like, they have a better receiving core, they have a better quarterback than, Ryan Tannehill. But if your offense is so predicated on the run, do they have enough there to really be able to to maximize this team and kind of go where they're clearly wanting to go.
That's why we asked the question.
Exactly. And then finally is the Browns. You know, what do you say about the Browns? My question was, will a starting QB emerge from the ashes? You know, like they're doing this weird thing that's really never been done before. They have these 4 quarterbacks, and it seems like every other day I read a report about the next guy who's probably going to be starting for the Browns. Most recently, it's Joe Flacco has kind of thrown his hat into the ring as a starter. I read a report that, you know, Myles Garrett and some of the veterans on the team want Flacco to start week 1. You know, during the rookie mini camp, it was all about Shedeur Sanders and how great he's doing, which is kind of weird. Like I can't remember a time when I saw like stat lines from a mini camp being read.
It's because they don't really actually matter is the secret that they don't tell you.
They just, you know, obviously Shedeur Sanders is a big name. He's a big talking point. It increases the ratings. I get it. But it's just one of those things where it's like, can they... And, you know, like I talked about before, how when we're asking these questions, we're saying like, can they reach their ceiling? The Browns don't really have a ceiling, to be frank. So the question is just like, can they at least get a direction? Like that's the ceiling for the Browns. If we can leave the season with some sort of clarity related to the quarterback situation, we're going to be happy, right? And, you know, maybe that's kind of inevitable.
Even.
Yeah. The worst case scenario is that they just start like Kenny Pickett or Joe Flacco the whole time and just like suck with them, because then it's like, what have we learned? Nothing. We've learned that Kenny Pickett and Joe Flacco are where we think they are as quarterbacks, and we've learned nothing about these rookies. That's really what the goal is, right? Like at the end of the day, you want to look at the Brown season and be like, we know that all 4 of these quarterbacks suck, or we know that one of these quarterbacks can be a future quarterback within the league and kind of lead this team into a new era of football.
Yeah, let's not rule out a Kenny Pickett resurgence.
Hey, you never know, man. But the saddest part about the whole season is I don't think that's going to happen. What I think is probably going to happen is one of those 2 older guys are going to start. They're not going to be really good, and you're not even going to know what you have from your rookies, and it's going to be like another season of discovery.
Yeah.
So
you're probably right.
Will a starting quarterback emerge from the ashes is my question for the Browns, though. All right. And that's it. That's the AFC North, right? All the teams I think are pretty simple.
Yeah. I will go ahead and kick us off with the AFC West. And some of my questions are posed more so as not just this season, but the future as well, and just how we frame that matters. Starting off with the AFC West, the Las Vegas Raiders. The question is quite simply, is Ashton Gianti a foundational piece? Is he and that's a different thing than being a quality starting running back. Ashton Gianti, when we walk away at the end of this season, are we looking at that roster and going, hey, the quarterback position is obviously inherently the most valuable on an NFL offense, but is this actually the guy that we build an offense around until we can find the quarterback to complement him with? Sure. Is this the person that will be putting butts in seats in Las Vegas for the next 5 years? And many people believe he can be that, but that is the question. Yeah, exactly. I need to see it a little bit more. I am, a bit more staunchy and conservative when it comes to college football in terms of the pedigree of athletes that you were playing against. But that being said, he's obviously incredible. It's really just more so of a question of how great can he be. The next team is the Denver Broncos. And the question is, looking back to last season, did we see Bo Nix's floor, or did we see closer to his ceiling? Is this a guy who the entirety of the offseason has been built around Bo Nix and Sean Payton being the mastheads for this franchise? You've got him going into his sophomore year. He's older than some NFL, young NFL quarterbacks, but it's still his sophomore year, and he led the Broncos to the playoffs for the first time since Peyton Manning. He didn't blow up the stat lines with gaudy numbers, but he did his job. Is this going to be, if we phrased it using more specific terms, was last season more of a Mac Jones season, or was it insert whatever quarterback only continued to rise after their rookie season? That's really the ultimate question that makes or breaks the Broncos, because if we go back to our offseason grades, I loved their offseason. I loved their draft. I loved all of the moves that they made. So as cliche as it is, the make or break here is the quarterback position.
Yeah. And I think that people underrate the situation, or just underrate how good of a situation that Bo Nix was in. Because obviously when you're talking about this question of did he reach his floor, or was that his floor, or was it his ceiling, situation really matters in this conversation. Because if we say like, well, he wasn't in that good of a situation and he still performed, then we would imagine that, a better offseason, a better context, and he would then begin to be maximized. But the truth is that Bo Nix was in a great situation. They had, according to PFF, I believe the second best offensive line in the Broncos. They're going to be the second best offensive line next year, according to PFF. And so from that perspective, plenty of time in the pocket. They did have the best, I believe, pass blocking percentages and stat lines when it comes to pressure rate.
And they probably have, outside of the Eagles, what we would
things.
call the best defense in the NFL.
Exactly. And so it's one of those things where it's like you have a great defense. I would say their defense only got better, and that's why their offseason is so good. They're going to have an amazing offensive line. There was like no turnover in that unit. And so the question really is just the weapons. And, we talked about how the weapons were definitely not on par with a lot of the more contending teams, but they still have guys. And so it's one of those things where it's like, situationally, it's not like the context got what was so bad that we can say that he elevated his team. I think that in reality, we were just, sports media and just the NFL community as a whole was just underrating the Broncos when it comes to that defense, that pass rush, that secondary, which might be the best unit in the league next year, and then that offensive line. And so it created this perception that Bo Nix was elevating this team to a playoffs, when in reality, we were just kind of wrong from the start about the makeup of this team. And now we're coming into the season where their strengths, they got stronger. And arguably, again, I think the biggest problem with their offseason was the lack of weaponry. But, I would expect a lot of development from Marvin Mims, who's kind of their wide receiver 2 and is probably going to play that role next year. They got Evan Ingram, who's going to be, I think, a really good option for Bo Nix. And so his situation got better. But the question is just like, is he really that maximizer that we're expecting? Because that a lot of people are kind of pushing. If he is that maximizer, we're looking at a team that can be contending for Super Bowls in the next few years. I don't know if next year is the time that they put it together, but we're talking about a team that can hold the most elite offenses in the league to a touchdown and a field goal.
Yeah.
And then
absolutely.
From that perspective, it doesn't take a lot of work for Bo Nix with the weaponry that he has and a great offensive line. And then obviously the new running back, RJ Harvey, right? That's his name?
Yep. He's a stud.
Like, we can kind of see a situation where it's like, wow, their offense doesn't even really need to do much. And so this is basically all to say that this is kind of muddying where Bo Nix actually sits. If he can elevate past that to the point where it's like, holy crap, they're winning these games because Bo Nix is just that good, then we're talking about potentially one of the most complete rosters within the NFL. And they can win Super Bowls kind of like how the Eagles did last year, in that same kind of fashion.
100%. The next team in the AFC West is the Los Angeles Chargers.
Sure.
Can Justin Herbert win outside of hypothetical scenarios? Is he capable? Is it possible for him to be able to do so? I mean, Justin Herbert is undefeated in hypothetical scenarios.
He is.
I don't, and these are open-ended. Some of these I have a very clear inference. I do, as much as
Sure.
I've talked smack on Justin Herbert, I do mean this legitimately. It's not rhetorical. Can Justin Herbert put all of the hypothetical traits and tools and abilities that he has alongside the very real traits and abilities that we know that he has together with someone who is at bare minimum an exceedingly competent NFL head coach in Jim Harbaugh, and string together not just a playoff win, but at least a couple playoff wins? That's the point that we're at right now, and that's why when we have the Justin Herbert conversation, it's always a little convoluted to me, because people always talk about in terms of, oh, if he can just put all of this together, then he can go on some playoff run. And again, I say it over and over again, like, he hasn't won a playoff game. The jump
Right.
between having never done that and making what people talk about as if suddenly he can make at minimum a conference championship run, that's winning 2, maybe 3 playoff games, assuming
Probably
that
3.
probably 3, because I
Yeah.
still doubt, we'll talk
I
about
doubt
it here in just a second, I doubt they win the AFC West. And so, yeah, that's the question for the Chargers.
Or
Can
the
Justin
AFC
Herbert?
is what they would have to do. They're not going to get the bye.
Yeah.
Like
Exactly. Yeah. So, exactly. Yes. But then that kind of transitions me right into the final question of the AFC West, which is the Kansas City Chiefs. How bad is the hangover? We talk about the Super Bowl hangover all the time for people who lose the Super Bowl, and it's a very real thing for the most part if you go back throughout history, especially in the last 10, 20 years. The Chiefs, the last time that they lost a Super Bowl to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, they, of course, made it back to the AFC Championship game. Now, that probably was the worst playoff loss of Mahomes' career if you look at the actual play on the field in that 2022 AFC Championship game versus the Bengals, where he probably had he had the worst.
Could he be the best?
He had the worst half of his playoff career. And I know for people who may be new to the NFL and are coming off of that Super Bowl and are like, what? He got destroyed in the first. I promise you, you can't just purely look at the box scores. That probably was the worst half of football that Mahomes had ever played.
Can I say why real quick?
Yeah.
Because when you look at the Super Bowl last year, Patrick Mahomes was not the reason why their team sucked.
Yes.
And, I'm not going to come up here and say that, like, in that, championship game in 2022, that Patrick Mahomes was the only reason why they weren't successful. But, like, Patrick Mahomes couldn't do it, right? Like,
yes,
the Bengals basically said, you're going to be the one who beats me. And, we are betting on the fact that no matter what we do, you're still going to be the one who has the ball in your hands. And Patrick Mahomes just wasn't able to do it. And so, that's
history won't
true.
remember it this way, which is unfortunate because it just means that history doesn't know ball. But
history, biggest enemy of the show.
True. The 2022 AFC Championship game loss was far more damning to whatever Mahomes' legacy will be than this Super Bowl loss. Don't care about the box score. Don't care about the final score of the game. It's the same thing as the Tampa Bay Super Bowl loss. If you actually watch the game and see what Mahomes was doing out on the field during those, in those instances, it becomes clear that one of the few individual failures that he has had was that AFC Championship game against the Bengals.
Absolutely.
And so, and all of that is coming back to the context of that was the last time the Chiefs had a season post Super Bowl loss, which was still a conference championship game in overtime. That's the worst. Yeah. That is the worst that Patrick Mahomes has ever done as a starter in his NFL career, is lose in the AFC Championship game in overtime. And he's done that twice. First in his first season starting, his second year in the NFL, and then 2022. that's the expectations that we have for Patrick Mahomes. And when I say we, I'm not just talking about myself as a Chiefs fan. I'm saying the NFL public, whether they like
For
to
sure.
or not, that's the expectation he's created because he's literally never not done it. And so now the pressure is on because I actually think sneakily some of the Patrick Mahomes and Chiefs hate will die off because of the loss. It won't be nearly as intense. But if there's a lackluster playoff performance or season, then all of a sudden there's going to be some really interesting discourse in the NFL space.
Yeah, for sure. And I think like just to kind of, I guess, like hone in on that point, it really is just a question of, did the Chiefs do enough with the pickups with all of the moves that they did to solidify that offensive line? I'm
Yes.
not, like it's one of those things where it's like, I do trust Veach, like I do trust that front office, but this is definitely, I feel like before it was like by before I mean after the Tampa Bay Super Bowl loss, it was like pretty clear, right? Like, okay, like this new iteration of this offensive line is going to be good enough, right? Like you had enough hope. Obviously a lot of it was dependent upon those rookies, Creed Humphrey, Trey Smith, whatever. But, you brought in Orlando Brown, like you did all these things and it was like, okay, this actually seems like they're really moving in the right direction. They still have Joe Thuney, whatever. Now it's one of those things where it's like, I don't know, to be honest, if they did enough. Like PFF actually graded or predicted them to have the 20th best offensive line in the league next year, which I think is a little bit low. I don't know if I'm that low on them, but there are questions, right? You're talking about a rookie. You're talking about pretty much a backup. He was a backup to Trent Williams, but he's still a backup in the NFL. And it's like, and then you're also putting a lot of trust in, what's his name? I just like can't pronounce it. To move to left guard.
Kingsley Suamataia.
Yeah, Kingsley Suamataia, where it's like, will he, he's clearly struggled at left tackle. Will he be better at left guard? That whole left side of the line is a question mark. And so we'll just have to see.
Yeah.
I think overall, I trust the front office more than I don't trust them, but it's still a question.
It is a question. Yes, it is a question.
Alrighty. That's the whole AFC West, right?
Yep.
All right, let's move on to the NFC North. So kind of talking about offensive line, my favorite topic of discussion. Let's move on to the Lions, which their question is just, can their offensive line maintain the same level of historical dominance? And obviously there was two major storylines with the Lions. And I think that most people are might be a little bit surprised by the storyline that I chose to base my question around. That being, obviously we saw Aaron Glenn and Ben Johnson leave, those coordinators. But I think what's more important for the Lions season and what's really going to determine whether or not they can reach their ceiling is the kind of shuffling of their offensive line. So just to kind of summarize a little bit, last year their starting core was Taylor Decker at left tackle. Then you had Graham Glasgow at left guard, Frank Ragnow at center, right guard was Kevin Zeitler, and right tackle was Penei Sewell. Well, coming into this offseason, we had Frank Ragnow retire, we had Kevin Zeitler move on to the Titans, and so that created this kind of shift where now Graham Glasgow is going to be playing center, and then to fill those guard positions, it's going to be Christian Mahogany, who they picked up, not in the last draft, but the draft before, and then Tate Ratledge, who they picked up this year. And so the new starting core is going to be Tyler Decker at left tackle, Christian Mahogany at left guard, center is going to be Graham Glasgow, right guard is going to be Tate Ratledge, and then right tackle is Penei Sewell. And the reason I think this is so important is because the more research I did into the Lions and how they kind of ran their team and that offense, it became pretty clear that while Ben Johnson is an incredible offensive coordinator, and nothing I'm going to say is going to diminish from him as a offensive coordinator, it really was a team effort from Jared Goff, from Dan Campbell to a lot of the assistant coaches, that they really did put this offense together in a manner where it's one of those situations where it's like not all the credit should go to Ben Johnson. And so in my mind, and the same is kind of true with that defense. And so for me, it's really just a question of, because if you look at their team, yes, they had a good defense, but their offense was the shining aspect of that team. can their offensive line will that offensive line be good enough to allow for that scheme to be successful? In my mind, the bright line for how good their offensive line has to be is top 5 in order for that scheme to work in a manner that will lead them to a Super Bowl, which is, I think, their ceiling when you look at their roster. PFF grades their offensive line or projects their offensive line to be 13th next year, which is the first time it's been out of the top 10 in years, even when they sucked and they were, picking number 1 or number 3 overall. And so, and I talked about this in our episode where we graded the Lions offseason. And even last week when I talked about Christian Mahogany as my breakout player, this offensive line is the biggest thing. So again, the question, can their offensive line maintain the same level of historical dominance? That is, in my opinion, the Lions' season. If they take any meaningful steps back in that offensive line, we're not looking at the same level of success on offense. And from that perspective, it's like, we're not looking at them as real contenders anymore. Like, I truly believe that they won't win the NFC North if they don't at least, like, I'm not saying that they can't take a few steps back, but I'm saying if it's a meaningful difference, they're not going to be as successful. That's the question that they have to answer, right? Obviously the coordinators is a question, but I think that the biggest question is just, will that offensive line be as good? Again, you just have to look at the scheme to know, like, they have to have a good offensive line. If they don't, it's just going to fall apart.
Yep.
Moving on, the Vikings. My question is just simply, is O'Connell the QB whisperer that we think he is? Their defense is going to be just as successful, if not better. They have the weapons. They have the O-line, which they invested heavily in. It's just, can O'Connell maximize J.J. McCarthy? If he can, we're looking at a team that can compete for the NFC again. If not, we're looking at a team that, there's going to be a lot of question marks related to their quarterback room.
And there's the one note I'll say on that is there's a wide gap between what those two realities look like. I mean, that's the gap between winning the division and probably losing the division, all wrapped up in that one question.
Exactly, just because of the progress of the Bears and the Packers potentially.
And also just the uncertainty of J.J. McCarthy just being a complete unknown.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Like, it could get scary for the Vikings if O'Connell can't do what he's done in the past, 3 years. All right, moving on to the Packers. The Packers are a tough one because it's kind of hard to diagnose what exactly their ceiling is. But when I was thinking about it more and more last year, I was kind of looking at, obviously that loss to the wild card. And I realized that they might be a lot closer than people realize, because even though they were the third team, the third ranked team within the NFC North, they put up a good fight against the Eagles. And even though the box score might not reflect it, rewatching that game and looking at it, it's just like Jordan Love just has to be better. Like, he just can't have those 3 interceptions. They have to have a better offensive first half. And we're looking at a team that could potentially knock off the Eagles in the playoffs. And from there, it's really just, how far can they go? And so for them, I think their ceiling really is just like winning a playoff game and potentially even making a conference championship. And the way that would go, the one question they have to answer is, can the passing game compete with the top teams in the NFC? Looking at it last year, and I talked about this whenever I was grading them, the Packers were credited with 33 drops, which tied for third most within the NFL. Their drop rate on average was 6.9%, which was the second highest. According to Pro Football Focus, Jaden Reed's was top 10 when it comes to drops within the NFL. Dontavian Wick's drop rate was 17%, which ranked second to the last, and Reed's was 15.4%, which ranked third. The players dropped 8.2% of passes thrown by Jordan Love, specifically within man coverage. And so, it's not just the wide receivers. It's also a problem with Jordan Love. LaFleur came out and said that the biggest thing that Love needs to focus on is focus and ball placement, and that a lot of those drops were because the ball just wasn't in the right area for that given context. And then obviously looking at that playoff game, Jordan Love can't throw 3 interceptions, in the wild card against the eventual Super Bowl champions. He just can't. And so, the more I looked into it, the more I realized that the Packers might be competing for a conference championship. They can figure this out. They add in Matthew Golden, who I think is going to help a lot. Will we see the development from Jordan Love? Will this passing game be on that level with some of the other great teams within the NFC? If it is, we're talking about an historically great and incredible organization that always seems to be competitive, and a culture that sets a foundation for a team that can really elevate past a lot of their expectations. If not, we're looking at another team that could potentially lose the NFC North and miss the playoffs.
Yeah, it's as simple as that. I think the Packers as a team, to me, they're in many ways like not in their play style, but in their expectations, are the Steelers of the NFC, where it's like they're not going to dip below like 7-10. I also have a hard time seeing them go above 10-7. And that's what it is for me. Maybe that's unfair and a stereotype of that organization's history outside of some of the seasons of brilliance from Aaron Rodgers, but that's a lot of what it seems to come down to.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, moving on. Last team in the NFC North, the Bears. Really simple question. Will the Bears establish a winning culture? I think that people are putting too many expectations on the Bears, and Caleb Williams particularly, and that combination with Ben Johnson. I talked about this when we graded them, but last year we shouldn't consider Caleb Williams' rookie season as his real rookie season. There was just too much turmoil when it comes to the context of his coaching, of his scheming, of the play calling, and everything related to that. And so, because of that, it led to a really disappointing year. And yes, the Bears did get meaningfully better, especially in terms of the context they put Caleb Williams in. We now have one of the brightest, potentially best offensive play callers in the league on his side. We now have what PFF projects to be a top 4 offensive line in 2025 with all the investments that they made there. We have young explosive weapons that they picked up in the draft, and then obviously expectations for Rome Odunze to take steps forward. But even all of that context, I still think that it's going to take time. And that step 1, which starts as soon as Ben Johnson gets in the building, is just establishing a winning culture. And what I mean by that is not necessarily a culture that leads to winning, but a culture that in the right context can be successful and go on a dominant run for as long as Caleb Williams is there in his prime, if that makes sense. It's a small distinction, but it's an important one, where it's not like we're looking at the Bears and saying that they have to make the playoffs or this is a failure. We just have to look at the Bears and say, like, we see the makings of a team that is going to start winning. I feel like we kind of, and we see it throughout history, and you can see the teams, right, that have winning cultures and don't have winning cultures, right? So like the Chiefs, for example, Andy Reid came in and he established a winning culture. It didn't immediately lead to Super Bowls, but it created this foundation where they had they eventually got the right pieces, and now they're a dynasty. Right.
Although to be fair, it did lead to immediate winning, not of Super Bowls, but I mean immediate playoffs.
Right. And I think a lot of that has to do with just the experience of Alex Smith, right? Yes. Like there's a difference between that context. But another example I would say is like Sean Payton, right? Coming in with the Broncos, and, the first year it wasn't necessarily an astounding success, but we did see some steps in the right direction. And then the next year they make the playoffs when they get their quarterback, Bo Nix. And so it's just like, can we see that same progression where it's like, maybe they still lose the division, maybe they only win 5 or 6 games, but we see those flashes from Caleb Williams that made him one of these generational prospects. And we see just the difference within their culture and the body language of the guys in the reports that are coming out of the locker room that make you optimistic about the future. If we can reach that, then I think we're looking at a team that could potentially, they've made incredibly smart moves, I think, as a whole over the last 2-3 seasons outside of coaching hires, where it's like, we have a smart front office. We have an incredible head coach that's established a winning culture. We have a quarterback for the future. We have this great young defense. We have weapons for that quarterback. We have an incredible offensive line. The sky's really the limit for the Bears. It doesn't have to happen next year. All we have to see is those markings of a winning culture, and at that point you can pretty much take it as far as you want to in terms of narratives.
Yeah. Well, moving on to the AFC East, the first team up is the New England Patriots. Can Mike Vrabel establish a new identity? Coaching is going to be a theme for this division, but specifically when it comes to Mike Vrabel, I think what everyone talks about when it comes to the Patriots has been Drake May and his progression. It's not that I don't care about that. It's that I think that that almost is soaking up too much of the noise. And the biggest part of this offseason was the addition of Mike Vrabel. Now that we have him within this organization, what is he going to build? Is it going to be basically a repeat of the Patriot way under Bill Belichick? Are there going to be slight distinctions? Really, what sort of culture and identity is he going to provide? Because I think a lot of New England fans have been a little bit burnt out by the Bill Belichick Patriot way dynastic regime and culture around the Patriots. And at this point, the dynasty is dead. You have to build something new. Now, Mike Vrabel, in many ways, is very similar to Bill Belichick, but how is he going to distinguish himself and stamp himself onto New England Patriot history? That's the real question.
And I think that, the conversation, and this is what people are missing, is that the conversation of Drake May, and if he's able to elevate, is inherently tied to Vrabel. Like when you bring in, and obviously they're, I guess, on a different timeline, but they're, for all intents and purposes, on the same timeline, right? Where it's like you have this new quarterback, you have this new coach. Can they, as a duo, as a tandem, start to create this new identity? Because I think that's really what it's going to be based on, if that makes sense.
Yeah. For the New York Jets, is Aaron Glenn the real deal? And this is based somewhat off of my opinion of him as being potentially the real deal. As I said on a previous episode of this show, I'm placing my bets on 3 years from now. We look back and say that Aaron Glenn was the better Detroit Lions coordinator hire as compared to Ben Johnson. I truly believe that. Now it just has to play out on the field. And when I say play out on the field, that doesn't mean instant playoff success, because even more so than the Chicago Bears or really many other NFL franchises, except for perhaps the Cleveland Browns, this is a roster that is not in a position to win. That's not really the concern at this point. It's about the culture that Aaron Glenn can bring in, because at this point, that's probably about the best thing that you can hope for if you're a New York Jets fan, because it's just been a pattern of meddling ownership and then complete disastrous moves over time. And the latest example of this was complete subservience to Aaron Rodgers, in which you hand him the keys to the kingdom. And I don't think that Aaron Glenn enjoyed being put in the position of telling Aaron Rodgers, hey, pack your stuff and leave, you're out of here, bye-bye. But that's the type of tough decision that you have to make when you're presented with a circumstance like that. And so, I think some people talked about it like, oh, he's really going to distance himself from the locker room. Maybe even so, maybe it will be something that he has to get over, the way that the Aaron Rodgers situation ended. That's absolutely the move that you have to make if you're coming in and establishing yourself as the column and the head voice in that locker room, not Aaron Rodgers. And so, that's what the Jets have to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I
Move.
think that
Oh, go ahead.
I think that sorry, just one thing. I do think it really is just very similar to the Bears and the Patriots and just all these teams that got these new head coaches, which is just like, can we see a difference in the history that you've presented to us? Where it's like none of these organizations for the past decade have really been seen any level of success. So it's like, can we just see a difference in how you operate and how you move? Where it's like we could see you at some point being successful.
100%. No, agree with all of that. For the Miami Dolphins, the question that will need to be answered, and I'm perhaps the most curious about of any of the questions that I've posed for these NFL teams, how quickly does Mike McDaniels get hired by another NFL team once he's fired?
So you're basically implying that he's gonna get fired.
Yes, this is the most heavy inference that I'm making in any of these questions.
Mm-hmm.
I'm of the opinion that the Dolphins are going to be a quite miserable NFL team. Not that they even should fire Mike McDaniels, but almost in order to start the reset clock, you have to. And I'm curious how quickly Mike McDaniels will get hired by another NFL team, because I imagine it will be quite quickly.
Yeah, for sure. I guess the question is just like, do they then get rid of Tua somehow?
I don't know. I don't know how they blow it
Okay.
up. Basically, this question is just a device for me to be able to say that the Miami Dolphins are going to be very bad. For the Buffalo Bills.
How did they reach their ceiling? They don't.
They don't have one to reach. The Buffalo Bills. Speaking of ceilings, ironically, you brought it up perfectly. Has Sean McDermott reached his ceiling? There's a very terrifying statistic out there for Bills fans, which is that no quarterback coach combo who did not reach the Super Bowl within their first 5 years together have they ever made or won a Super Bowl together. That's never happened in the history of the NFL. And there are, that's a statistic with plenty of qualifying, instances throughout NFL history. That's not a very niche statistic, meaning that in order for Josh Allen and Sean McDermott as a head coach quarterback pairing to make the Super Bowl or win a Super Bowl would be bucking all of NFL history. And who do we think the league gonna start over. Who do we think that the weak link in that relationship is? Sean McDermott or Josh Allen? I have my opinion. What's yours? So that's the question. And I'm not saying that it is impossible. I'm just saying that there are plenty of instances throughout NFL history in which a head coach who is relatively enjoyed by the fans did a great job into building that franchise into a respectable quality position has to be let go because he simply is incapable, for whatever reason, be it tangible or intangible, get over the hump.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I definitely think that is the question. It's kind of similar to the Ravens, right? It's just the differences surrounding, like with Lamar and Harbaugh, the question is just like about Lamar, where with the Bills, the question is about McDermott.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Moving on to the AFC South, starting with the Texans. Will Stroud make it out of 2025 alive? Because that's really just the question with the Texans, right? Last year, they had the worst offensive line in the league, and their solutions to fix that was to get worse, right? They traded Laramie Tunsil because they're cheap, and then they signed Cam Robinson in order to replace him, who ranked 25th in pass block win rate and 45th in run block win rate. On top of that, he had the third highest pass pressure rate among left tackles, with at least 500 pass blocking snaps, and he led up the fourth most amount of sacks. He was not good. They also signed Lincoln Tomlinson, who is durable and hasn't missed a lot of games, but is clearly declining. He's allowed the 6th highest pressure rate among left guards and 11 sacks. So really it's just because like the whole Texans organization, their defense is going to be great, right? People don't talk about it, but they could be top 5 potentially, right? They have an incredible secondary. They have a really solid linebacking core, and they have a great pass rush. And that's, of course, headed off by an incredible defensive-minded head coach in DeMeco Ryans. The question is just, can their offense do anything with CJ Stroud? And will we see the development that we would expect kind of coming off of his rookie season? And can we see a bounce back from that supposed sophomore slump that he had? And all of that, in my mind, is going to be dependent upon the success of that offensive line. And, maybe this is me kind of inferring about exactly how well I think that offensive line is going to do, kind of like what you did with the Dolphins. But that's that's the question for the Texans. I think they could mess around and win the division just because of how weak their division is. But if they want to be competing for, conference championships and potentially going to Super Bowls, they're going to just have to do better. And this O-line is going to have to be better. And CJ Stroud is going to have to survive the 2025 season. And I'm not really confident that that's going to happen, given the guys that they have protecting him. Let's move on. After that little rant, let's talk about the Colts. Kind of interesting situation. My question is just like, will they finally have answers regarding the QB room? And this is, kind of unique from other quarterback situations, where it's not like they've picked their position and then said, and then the question is related around that player. It's really just like, do they even have a player, right? Like, are they even in a situation where they can decide this season if they have a quarterback? And that's kind of what the 2025 season, I feel like, is really going to come down to, where it's like, maybe they somehow sneak into the playoffs if Daniel Jones kind of plays better than expected. I don't imagine them making the playoffs with Anthony Richardson starting at quarterback. But it really is just this question of just, can they have some clarity? Because obviously you have the tangibles, you have the numbers and the athleticism for Anthony Richardson. But on the flip side of that, you also have all of the injuries that he stacked up across his entire career. And even when he's not hurt, you have really pretty horrendous play at the quarterback position within the NFL. And so there's always been, I feel like, in the past, reason for optimism because of his tangibles. In 2025, I truly believe this is the last year where you can reasonably say that we should give Anthony Richardson a shot.
Yes, I think many people would.
I feel like that is giving a lot of grace to the whole situation.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That would be coming from the perspective of someone who would have the utmost amount of grace. I don't even know if I would be there, but you are right. This is, at best case scenario, his last chance.
Exactly. I think a lot of people would say that ship has sailed. But I think from the Colts as an organization, they have a lot of good pieces. They have a good foundation.
Well, it's also just the level too of what else are you going to try at this point? It's basically going to be between trying out Anthony Richardson and Daniel Jones. I mean, it's not like you're holding back the development of other players. You don't have a better option. That would that would be the best argument for playing Anthony Richardson.
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of what I think. Right? Yeah. Like, if he's healthy, you might as well just try it, because it's not like you're going to be doing much with Daniel Jones, unless you truly believe that you are, from a front office perspective.
Well, Daniel Jones is gonna start the season inherently, both because of where he's at in camp and Anthony Richardson's health. So Daniel Jones will get his fair shot. It's really about at what point, if at all, does Anthony Richardson come in mid-season.
Yeah. And so basically it's just like, can the Colts at the end of the 2025 season know definitively what to do?
Yeah.
Right? Whether that's sign a new quarterback, whether that's, I think Daniel Jones is on a 1-year deal, so extend Daniel Jones, whether that's, fully go in on Anthony Richardson. Just like, can they clearly have enough? It's kind of similar to the Browns. Will they have enough information to make a smart, rational decision? because
Yep.
so far they really haven't had that after the end of every season. All right, Jaguars, my favorite man. Will Liam Cohen be able to bring Trevor Lawrence back to 2021 form?
Yes.
Right. I don't really know if there's any much to say. Obviously, Travis Hunter is someone to talk about. He is just a rookie, and I think that given his unique situation, it's really going to take time before he finds his role on a team. And I think that for the Jaguars to reach their ceiling, which is, a fun team that, potentially could, if they make the right moves, push for a playoff performance at some point within the next 3 years. All of that is going to happen based on how Liam Cohen performs and if he can take Trevor Lawrence back to that level. Because if not, then you're looking at a team that is like rebuilding on top of a rebuild, right? Like, let's take a reset. Like, we got this new head coach, we got this new GM. But if Trevor Lawrence doesn't, start playing back to that, his peak, it's like, well, now what do we do? Like, do we just like double down on a rebuild? If he does, though, then it's, you can start to see some progression.
Yes.
And then finally, the Titans. Will Cam Ward be more good than bad? Right? Yeah. If you watch the episode where we talked about Cam Ward, then you'll know the enigma that is Cam Ward whenever you look at his college play. But it's just a question of like, can Cam Ward be better than he is worse? Like, can we see those signs of, this exceptional athlete? Because in my mind, Cam Ward is one of those players where it's like there is no middle ground. Either he's going to be a top 5 quarterback, maybe not top 5, top 10 quarterback within the NFL, or he's not going to get a second contract. Right? Like, either he's going to be one of those guys where you want to watch him play because it's just so fun, the things that he can do, the way that he plays that style where everything looks slow, and being able to see that on an NFL field will just be so incredible to watch. And you'll see this kind of resurgence of Titans football, where all of a sudden they're now competing for the division, whatever. Or you're going to see a situation where it's like, this was one of the worst first overall picks that we've ever seen.
And they've perfectly...
I don't see a lot of in between.
The Titans are in a weird position because they're... I don't know, we don't need to go through the whole history of the Tennessee Titans as a franchise, but they're kind of a bastard child of the NFL teams in terms of fandom, being relatively very small compared to being in one of the prime football states of America, which is Tennessee, with all of its college football. But Cam Ward has the ability to pair himself, and I know this seems small, but they're building a new stadium right now. I've driven by it multiple times. It's going to be really great. It's in a prime location. Yeah. I can't wait to go visit it once it opens. And all of a sudden, there is a world in which all of these factors work out and break the right way for the Titans, and they're a legitimately respectable and considered well-run, competent NFL franchise. That seems like a world that shouldn't be lived in, but that is a legitimate possibility. There's also a world in which this breaks the wrong way. Cam Ward's terrible. The new stadium is basically half empty, and all of a sudden, the Tennessee Titans might be sold somewhere. I mean, that's all of those things are on the table.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, that was the last team. So
yeah,
let's move on to the next division.
I will go ahead and take on the NFC West. We're going to talk first about the 49ers. And this is a simple question and a term that you've probably heard all over the place. But is Brock Purdy a force multiplier? He got his money. Mm-hmm. The defense is objectively worse now just because they had to lose the talent in order to pay Brock Purdy, and they lost some of the weaponry as well. Although Christian McCaffrey will be returning and healthy from last season, the question is, now that you're paid like a quarterback who can amplify a team and an offense specifically, Can you actually perform like that? And he's going to receive a lot of help from Kyle Shanahan, who's probably one of the 5 best head coaches in the NFL. I say probably just because some people disagree with that. I don't whatsoever. I would put him firmly in that position. And
I
so
feel like that's pretty obvious.
Exactly. But so now it is as overly simplistic as it is Brock Purdy capable of doing that for the 49ers? That's all it is.
Yeah. Well, and that, it might be simple, but there's a lot of context and like there's a lot of, I guess, variables that play into that.
Yes.
But the biggest thing here is just their offseason was defined by them betting that he is. So of course that's the question that this season is going to be revolved around, right? Like they said, we are letting these defenders go who were the cornerstone of our defense in order to pay Brock Purdy, because we're betting on the fact that he is a good enough quarterback that with a worse defense and less weapons, we can still be back to, competing for Super Bowls. And so, yeah, that's the question of their season. Were they right? Was that a good bet? That's what we have to find out.
Absolutely. I would 100% agree. The Arizona Cardinals' biggest question for their offseason is, can this offense translate off of paper and onto the field? This is an NFL offense that is led by Kyler Murray with weapons like Marvin Harrison Jr., Trey McBride, and I won't say criminally under-discussed, but relatively under-discussed running back in James Conner compared to what he provides for that NFL team. So, but all of those pieces coalesced last season into, and obviously it was Marvin Harrison Jr.'s rookie year, but it coalesced into, I want to say, the 14th best scoring offense in the NFL. This should be top 10. This should be a top 10 offense without breaking a sweat. And that's where they're going to have to be while the defensive inadequacies are being repaired. Now, the defense is miles ahead of where they were 2 years ago. There was a big improvement from 2 years ago to this last season. There won't be nearly as big of an improvement this year, but there should be some. That offense will still have to.
Their defensive line is going to be good.
Yes.
Their D line is going to be good.
It will be. But that offense is going to have to compensate. And inherently that's going to be thrown on the shoulders of Kyler Murray, but the weaponry also has to stand up as well, because there is a weapon in every single room, be it tight end, wide receiver, or running back, that is capable of being a top 10 player at their position. And so we'll move right into the Seattle Seahawks. My question for them is simple. Will the real Sam Darnold please stand up? What was the real Sam Darnold? Was the real Sam Darnold the one that we'd seen for the first 4 years of his NFL career? Is it the Sam Darnold that was seeing ghosts? Is it the Sam Darnold for the first 16 games of the previous NFL season that was a dark horse MVP candidate, and then in week 18, their last game of the season, and in the playoff game, had perhaps the 2 most disappointing games of his NFL career relative to expectations? I mean, the peaks and valleys with this guy that we had last season are incredible, because we were on this trajectory of a resurgence, and then he wiped out almost the entirety of all of the good grace that he'd built up from 16 games of well-played football. In fact, those might be the most meaningful 2 games in NFL history when it comes to money lost. Sam Darnold, if he had performed well in that Week 17, and they would have been the NFC North division winners,
well, and the NFC winners.
And the NFC number 1 seed, on top of saying, even if he just won 1 playoff game, if they do that, and even let's say it's disappointing and they lose in the conference championship game after winning the division, they get a bye, win the divisional, blah, blah, blah. You're talking about Sam Darnold getting $35 to $40 million a year.
Maybe even more.
Maybe even more. Now that's gone. Will the real Sam Darnold please stand up? And then finally, for the Los Angeles Rams, this is more of a legacy question, but it pertains to this season as well, of course. How will we remember this Super Bowl window? Because it started, this Super Bowl window for them started the year that they won the Super Bowl. They got Matthew Stafford and immediately won the Super Bowl. And the window ever since then has still stayed open. Some people didn't believe it would. I have been of the belief, and I know I've won you around to it, that as long as Matthew Stafford is still Matthew Stafford and Sean McVay is still there, then the Super Bowl window is open. But how will we look back on it? Is it almost because it was so front-loaded by the fact that they won the Super Bowl immediately, and then everything since then has been somewhat on a downward slide? Are we going to remember it less fondly? Or perhaps, I'm not projecting any sort of Super Bowl victory, but you and I are both quite high on the Los Angeles Rams. If they make a conference championship run or even a Super Bowl run, say lose in the Super Bowl, however it might play out, do we look back on this and say that the Rams in this half-decade window were one of the best teams in the NFC? I mean, technically, if they made the Super Bowl this year and lost, they would have the exact same sort of conference dynasty that the Eagles have had, with two Super Bowl appearances and a Super Bowl victory. But they're not really discussed in that same way, and I think that they should be.
No. Well, and the reason why is because, and this is where it's like, yes, like for all intents and purposes, like their window was open for as long as Matthew Stafford was there, but there was like a clear mini rebuild after that Super Bowl win.
Yes.
Right? Like the front office basically said, and like there are quotes of the general manager before that Super Bowl basically saying, like, we don't care about draft picks. We don't care about developing young players. All we care about is winning a Super Bowl. And so like,
and then they did,
and
they had to take a step back.
And right, where it's like, was their Super Bowl open window really open? I would say no, just because I don't even think their front office operated as
in
if
that
it was.
First season
right? Like
afterwards. You're probably right.
So it's like that one season, and then boom, that's when the window opened again. But basically what I'm saying is, I think that's the reason why that, like, at least for me and for the rest of the NFL community, why there hasn't been as much buzz around this Super Bowl window, is because we kind of saw it as like a one and done type of situation that was really intentional, which is like, we're not trying to build a dynasty. We're trying to win right now. We're signing, Earl Thomas and Odell Beckham Jr. and Bobby Wagner and Von Miller and all of these really old guys that are past their prime to get them a Super Bowl and to get us a Super Bowl right now. And so then all those guys left immediately. And then we're in a situation where it's like, or it wasn't Earl Thomas, it was Weddle. But
Eric
regardless
Weddle,
of the fact, Eric Weddle, regardless of the fact, everything you said is right, where it's like, they're not talked about it, but like they could be like in this, I guess, era in the last like five years, just as dominant within the NFC.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is funny, because I think most people would say that like the second most dominant team within the NFC in the last 5 years is the 49ers, when it's like, well, the Rams won a Super Bowl, so.
Yes, exactly. That's what matters.
All right, so next we're going to be talking about the Bucs. And my question for them is just, can they look like a real playoff team? And to kind of explain that, the last few years when the Bucs have made the playoffs, I feel like the context surrounding that has always been like, they're in the worst division in football, where it's like, yes, they made the playoffs, but it's not like real. Like, it's not like they're a real playoff team, because they just have to beat out three terrible teams in the Panthers, Saints, and Falcons. So the question is just like, can this year be the year where they make the playoffs and it's like, wow, this is a team that like might actually win a game, even though I think that's a little bit unfair just because like they did beat the Eagles in the wild card rounds that one year.
Yes.
But that's really it for the Bucs. Like, can they kind of cement themselves as a playoff team that's not just a playoff team because their division sucks, but like they're the real deal and they have a chance at making a run?
Absolutely. No, there's nothing
the Falcons.
else to add.
Yeah. The Falcons. Will their unprecedented draft decisions pay off? And we talked about this when we were talking about the Falcons, which is that, 2 years ago, they took Michael Penix after signing probably the biggest offseason move when they signed Kirk Cousins. And then last draft this year, they chose Jalen Walker with the 15th pick overall, and then gave up next year's first round pick in order to get James Pierce Jr. With the 26th overall pick.
Mm-hmm.
And so basically what we saw is they went into that offseason saying, this is a weakness, and we're going to target this weakness within the draft and within the offseason more than anyone would expect. So the question is, does that idea of really over-investing in the quarterback position and then over-investing in the edge rushing position, will that pay off? Because, and Jonathan and I have talked about this before, but if you're going to start an NFL franchise and you only can pick like 3 positions or 3 people, it'd be head coach, it'd be quarterback, and it'd be edge rusher. Mm-hmm. And so here we have a situation where they have Raheem Morris, and I said that and I was like, wait, he's not the head coach.
Maybe they should. Maybe they should bring him on.
Maybe they should. Yeah, exactly. But anyway, where they are clearly seeing that this is their weakness and they're doing things that we've never seen before in order to attack that weakness. And so the question is just like, is this going to pay off? Because outside of those weaknesses in the past 2 years, you look at the team and it's like, this is kind of awesome, right? From an offensive perspective, you have Drake London and Mooney, Kyle Pitts, whatever you think about him, and then Bijan Robinson with like a top 5 offensive line.
Yeah.
And then from a defensive perspective, you have a great secondary. You have Jesse Bates, a decent linebacking core, but just like an horrendous pass rush. And so it's like, if this can pay off, we're looking at a team that really could make some noise within the NFC. And if it doesn't pay off, we're looking at another team that just is really mid.
Yes, that's all that matters. It's it's not that they've put all of their chips in, but they've put a lot of chips in really weird ways.
Yeah.
That's all it is.
So the question is that a good idea?
Probably not, but we'll see.
You would have to assume, but we'll see. All right. Saints, will they fulfill their destiny and tank? That's it. It seems like they are. Their roster is probably the worst in the league.
That might be the most positive question that you could have possibly posed for the Saints, as weird as that sounds.
I think so.
Because I hope like, that they do.
They're going to suck, but that's a good thing.
For once, they actually will commit to it. Maybe. We're assuming, we're hoping and praying.
We're hoping so. Yeah. Ugh. Exactly. And I think Saints fans are too. But yeah, will they fulfill their destiny and tank? Because it's been like a ticking time bomb with this cap space situation where it's like, just let it go. Let it go, guys.
Yeah.
Like, you can suck for a few years so that you can actually start off with some sort of flexibility, right? Like,
fair. I mean,
pick a quarterback in the first round.
I still have some belief in Tyler Shaw, but still.
Yeah. Well, right. It's not even one of those things where it's like, is Tyler Shaw going to be good? It's just like, from an organizational perspective, like, just make moves to reset so that you can make moves to get better.
Yes.
That's
all
it.
it is.
It's as simple as that.
That's the NFL.
And so the question is, will they do that? Yep. All right. The Panthers, just kind of classic, right? When you're talking about young teams with a young quarterback, can Bryce Young pick up where he left off last season? We talked about it before, but Bryce Young had an incredible end of the season last year. Down the stretch, he threw for 2,100 yards, 15 touchdowns with only 6 interceptions. On top of that, he led 6 game-winning drives or game-tying drives in the 10 games that he played after returning. And in the final 3 games, he registered a 111.6 passer rating and 64.8% completion percentage. He had 7 passing touchdowns in those 3 games with 0 interceptions. He played incredible, right? He was incredibly fun to watch. He did everything that you would want from a first overall former Heisman quarterback. And the question is just, can he pick up where he left off? I think we both agree that overall, his weaponry is better than it was last year. They have a surprisingly good offensive line. They picked up Tet McMillan within the first round. And so it's just, can he continue to grow as a quarterback? Because if he can, we're looking at a team where it's like a few, more good off seasons, and we're looking at a team that could potentially win the NFC South.
Absolutely. Well, that is your last division, so I will kick off my final division, which is the NFC East. Starting off with the New York Giants. Can the pass rush alone make them fun? The answer is probably yes. Dexter Lawrence, Abdul Carter, Kayvon Thibodeau, Brian Burns. This should be a team that in most every other area will not be fun this season, except for the pass rush. And it might be good enough on its own to make them a fun team to watch. That's probably the most that you're hoping for out of this season, because you probably don't. I'm of the opinion that you should not want your rookie quarterback in this position to be starting right away. I don't think that Jackson Dart is someone who you want to be starting by week 7.
For sure. Well, the hope is that Jackson Dart doesn't have to start at all, right?
Yeah.
Like that would be the dream case, or the best scenario. But yeah, as far as your question, yeah, I'm definitely one of those sick in the head guys who I'd watch a football game just for a good pass rush. Like that's worth it to me. That's not a waste of my time.
Yeah.
And then, don't forget that there is a world where our favorite Mr. Jameis Winston ends up starting or playing some games. So that would also be fun to watch.
Yes. Unfortunately, I couldn't make the question about Jameis Winston as much as I wanted to. The Dallas Cowboys. This is a question that really, in my opinion, encapsulates the Dallas Cowboys franchise as a whole and all of its convolution. Given the Dallas Cowboys' repeated postseason shortcomings under the ownership and general management of Jerry Jones, who has maintained a singular grip on both the football and business operations of the franchise for decades, and considering the high expectations yet again placed on a coach due to the firing of Mike McCarthy, quarterback Dak Prescott in a contract year, and a defense led by stars like Micah Parsons that has at times overshadowed an underperforming offense in critical moments, to what extent can one reasonably argue that the organizational structure Jerry Jones insists on preserving, marked by his unwavering public visibility, emotionally charged personnel decisions, and resistance to delegating true authority to football operations staff, continue to function as an impediment to championship-level success? And does the increasing scrutiny from both fans and media suggest that the Cowboys, despite boasting a talented roster on paper, may once again fall short due to systematic issues rooted more in executive ego than on on-field execution heading into the 2025 NFL season?
Yes.
The Washington Commanders is a sophomore.
That was crazy. You were spitting, dude. Holy crap. But yeah, to answer the question, yes, I do think that Jerry Jones is kind of a prick. Anyway, let's move on.
The Washington Commanders, that's all there is to say, is a sophomore slump in the cards. No, but maybe yes. It's hard to tell. I don't know.
The way you said that. No.
I from the perspective of wanting to watch good football, I hope not. And the term sophomore slump kind of gets thrown out as a concept, not as necessarily something that actually happens. Like it's not that it doesn't happen, but sometimes people talk about it as if it's the default thing that will happen to an NFL quarterback. But there's really so much context behind it that you can't just throw out that term and say, well, there's always probably going to be the sophomore slump. But that being said, it is a possibility on the table, and I'm more so interested to see if there is. I wouldn't even use the term regression, because that would imply that he's taking a step backwards and it'll be harder for him to recover. But let's just say statistically he doesn't perform as well, and they say they lose one more game than they did the previous season. How does the organization respond to that after putting in a lot of their chips on this offseason? Because that's the sneaky part about this offseason that's interesting, is nothing about what they did fundamentally changes the most important part of their team, which, as crazy it is to say because he was just a rookie, is Jaden Daniels. If Jaden Daniels...
Laramie Tunsil.
Well, yeah, that's fair. No, that's fair. That's a good...
Other than that.
That's
but no,
a good
you're
point.
right. Like in terms of weaponry, and yeah, you're right.
It's fundamentally this season is still going to fall almost entirely, whether fair or not, on Jaden Daniels' performance. And so, if a sophomore slump occurs, where does the franchise go from there? And then finally, go ahead.
No, I actually do. So the first thing is, yeah, you're right, though, that as a whole, the focus of this offseason wasn't necessarily to put Jaden Daniels in a better situation, right? Like, they believe he's a force multiplier and moved in that way, kind of similar to how the 49ers operated. But they just did different things. The other thing I'll say to that is the reason why a sophomore slump seems to be so persistent within the NFL is two reasons. The first reason is because very rarely do players exceed expectations 2 times in a row. And then the first reason is because it is a small sample size sport, which means that progress isn't linear.
Yes.
So the thing is, in order for you to have a sophomore slump, you have to exceed expectations in your rookie season. So that's why, like, CJ Stroud was set up for a sophomore slump, and why Jaden Daniels potentially is set up for a sophomore slump, because it's one of those things where it's like you have to exceed expectations in your rookie season. And just the way that people operate in NFL, community and media operates, is as soon as you do something somewhat successful and like you basically go against what people expected you to do, all of a sudden it's one of those situations where it's like, well, now you can do basically anything, because if you were better than I thought, then that doesn't mean that I was necessarily wrong. That just means that, like, you can really just do anything. And from there, from that perspective, the sky's the limit. So it's one of those situations where we almost put too many expectations on players who exceeded our expectations the year before, when the truth is that it's a small sample size sport. Growth isn't linear. And so in the next series of 17 games, maybe Jaden Daniels doesn't play from a stats perspective as well as the previous 17 games, which in a career is not many games. And so because of that, it's one of those things where it's like, is Jaden Daniels going to be worse? Absolutely not. May he have a sophomore slump? Potentially, just because, again, very rarely does someone exceed expectations and then exceed them again, just because as soon as they exceed expectations the first time, the expectations go bananas, where it's like, is he going to win MVP? And it's like, that shouldn't be the standard for this sophomore player. Like, could it happen? Yes, but it's not a disappointment if he doesn't.
I agree with everything you just said. Yep, you said it perfectly. There's nothing else much to say. The final team that we have a question to pose is the Philadelphia Eagles, your previous Super Bowl champions. The question is very simply, why should we believe that the defense, specifically the secondary, won't seriously regress? Because that's what happened when the Eagles made the Super Bowl originally in the first Chiefs Eagles matchup and they lost, they had what was the best defense in the NFL. And then the season after that, during their Super Bowl hangover, they got off to a decently hot start, but then immediately cratered and embarrassingly lost in the wild card round because they had the worst secondary in the NFL. Then they come back this season entirely retooled, and they have the best secondary in the NFL. Then this offseason happens, and they lose almost like half of the talent that they had, at least, whichever perspective you want to come at it from. And so I'm not saying that the Eagles are not going to be a playoff team, but the last three, now heading into a fourth year of this pattern, I'm just predicting that it's going to follow that pattern, that when they don't have a stellar secondary, and not just they don't have a stellar secondary, it probably will be at best average, then they're not going to perform as well as they did. That's the question, though. Why should I believe that they won't regress? Can they prove, not just to myself, I use a personal term, but to the many other people that have pointed this out, that their secondary can actually maintain that level of success?
Yeah. I think the answer is, spoiler alert, I think the answer is Fangio. I think that he's probably the second best coordinator in the NFL. And that, for them to see that same level of success, it's going to be
It will be entirely dependent on him, which is high risk, high reward from his perspective. Because if he does, I mean, he's going to be in some serious coaching conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, I think that's all the teams. I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah.
I think like it's a great thing to do just because it really helps us kind of understand like where these teams are and like exactly what to look for in 2025.
It's basically where 31 teams are going to be, and the Miami Dolphins, who we know where they're going to be.
Yeah, exactly. All right, let's play some games, dude. So I pretty much have some trivia planned. Just some interesting trivia and then also discussions about rookies. So the first one is we're going to be looking at quarterbacks who have passed for 5,000 yards in a season. So can you guess the quarterbacks who have passed for 5,000 yards in an NFL season? There's 9 of them. And so, you know, you don't have to go in any particular order. Just guess. Who do you think have done it?
Okay. Well, let's get the easy ones out of the way. Patrick Mahomes.
Yep.
Tom Brady.
Yes.
Drew Brees.
Yeah.
Peyton Manning.
Yes.
It's going way back. It's incredible that he did this. I mean, we all know who he is. Yes. Dan Marino.
Dan Marino. Yep.
How many is that? Is that 5?
So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah. So you have 4 more.
Now, obviously, some of these people have done this multiple times, but I'm just naming the quarterbacks who have done it. Okay. Stafford did it. Matthew Stafford did it.
He did.
So I've got 3 to go. How many are all of these players within this century?
Yes. Yeah, and 2 are still playing, 1 is retired.
2 are still playing.
2 of them are pretty surprising. One of them I feel like you should, if you just like throw out good quarterbacks in the last like 20 years, like he should come.
Roethlisberger.
Yeah. Yep. And so the next 2 are the ones that I'm surprised you haven't, like, it's one of the more recent ones.
Oh my goodness. Aaron Rodgers.
No, not Aaron Rodgers.
Oh, not Aaron Rodgers. No, yeah, he never did.
No, yeah. It's like I don't know how to give you a hint without giving it away.
No, I can do it.
Yeah.
Who would have? Oh,
because like it was
I know.
yeah.
It's why it didn't come to my head. I clearly don't think that highly of him, Herbert.
Yeah, there you go. All right, and the last one is my favorite.
Oh, uh, J-Bo, Jameis Winston. Jameis Winston did that.
That was my favorite season. 5,000 yards, like
30
touchdowns, 30 interceptions.
One of the greatest NFL seasons. How could I forget? Because the highlight of that season in my mind is always the 30 touchdowns, 30 interceptions. People forget.
I don't know if that's the numbers, by the way.
No,
it
is.
But
Well, it's
like
not
that.
Yeah, they weren't exactly, but he had at least 30 touchdowns and 30 interceptions.
Yeah, it was ridiculous. Just
and
absolute piss missiles.
5,000 yards. Wow.
Yeah.
All right, there we go.
Cooked. But what's interesting about that, so Dan Marino obviously was the first quarterback to ever do it in 1984. And then the next time a quarterback did it was in 2011. When three people did it in 2011. Tom Brady, Drew Brees, and Matthew Stafford. And then Drew Brees went on a crazy run. Or I'm sorry. No, Drew Brees did it in 08 too. It was 08 and then it was 2011 where all three of them did it. And then Drew Brees did it in 11, 2012, and 2013. And he leads the NFL with most amount of 5,000 yard seasons with 5.
Yeah.
Tom Brady and Patrick Mahomes are second with 2.
He's incredible.
Crazy.
Drew Brees is one of the greatest of all time. But also, let's not forget, I mean, the headliner of that list outside of Drew Brees is the fact that Dan Marino did it in 1984 and Drew Brees wasn't able, and no other quarterback was able to do it until 2008.
Which, we talked about this before, but the comparisons between Dan Marino and Justin Herbert.
Or Josh Allen, whichever way you want to do.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Okay, next, the final thing we're going to do is we're going to be looking at some of the over and unders. So this is according to ESPN Bet.
Okay.
So the question is, will you take the over or under on these NFL rookie stats? So first, we have Travis Hunter, over under 725.5 receiving yards.
So much of this just depends on the amount of snaps that he gets, but also that's a hefty number. For reference, Marvin Harrison Jr., who, of course, plays the wide receiver position full-time, only got like 830 yards last season. So I'm going to have to take the under on that.
With Travis Hunter, it's hard, especially like from a betting perspective, because you don't even know what his role really is going to look like. But I think it's pretty safe to say that even if he is like a starting wide receiver, just given, like you said, precedence, he's probably not going to reach over 725 yards.
Yeah, and because you're also, so much of that is dependent upon the quarterback play. And I know we're Liam Cohen people, but still.
Yeah, exactly. Next is Cam Ward, over under 3,100.5 passing yards.
I would take the over.
I think so.
I would take the over. Sense. Even if it's like because it could be an ugly 3,100 passing yards, and I still think he could get that.
Yeah. I think it's just about like opportunity. Like, I do think that the only thing that could really hurt this is like, it just depends on how bad his offensive line is. If his offensive line sucks, he might not get the opportunity.
Well, I think he probably, numbers, I think that number is probably more so indicative of if he gets benched at some point. If he starts essentially the whole, if he starts the whole season, he's gonna reach that mark.
Yeah, true. Okay. Next is Tet McMillan, over under 750.5 receiving yards.
This is hard because for the Panthers, Adam Thielen is such a security blanket even at his old age, and Xavier Legette is only going to grow within that offensive system.
Yeah.
What's the number again?
So really the question, 750.5. For me, the question is just like, do we think that Bryce Young is going to take such a step forward that he has the ability to, I guess you could say, maximize three receivers to the extent that we can?
Mm-hmm. Or even 2.5 if you want to say that Thielen's at the point where he's like a half of one.
Yeah.
I unfortunately, and It's not entirely indicative of what I think of Bryce Young because I do have hope. I
Yeah.
would take the under, though. That seems like a lot for a rookie wide receiver who's receiving targets or who's getting targeted by Bryce Young.
Yeah. I think I'm going to hit the over.
Okay.
I think he can get there.
Okay.
I think that his run after catch and then his long ball ability is going to
That's the one I've had the most pause about so far, for sure.
For sure. Next is Abdul Carter, over or under 6 sacks.
So 6 on the dot, not 6.5. So basically it would be 7 would be the over, break even 6.
Let's just say 6.5. It did say 6, but that's stupid. Let's just say 6.
That's Vegas making money in weird ways.
Yeah, it is.
Let's say 6.5. Okay. Yeah, I think that Abdul Carter is is enough of a freak, especially considering how many other freaks are on that defensive line. Like, there's not going to be many instances in which you can be double teaming Abdul Carter, which that's okay. Let's just take a step back here. The sentence that I just said, there's not many scenarios in which you're going to be able to double Abdul Carter, is a terrifying sentence to hear.
It is. Yeah, that is very scary for opposing quarterbacks. Yeah, I would smash the over. I think the only question mark is almost like the question of like, is there too many mouths to feed where they're all getting pressure, but just like when you look at how they
and sacks are a very fickle thing.
Sacks, it really is, where it's like you have to claim it or whatever. But like where it comes to the situation where it's like, oh, technically, he tackled the quarterback, but it didn't count as a sack or whatever. But I think that there's just going to be so many opportunities. And I think that Abdul Carter is probably going to be one of those guys that gets theirs first, which then would help him with that. And so for that reason.
And we're also talking about 7. Like, if we got to like that 9 area, that would be a little like, man, some things would have to break the right way.
For sure.
I'm pretty confident that Abdul Carter can get 7 sacks.
For sure, especially because like with Dexter Lawrence being such an imposing force up the middle, playing that kind of nose tackle role, like quarterbacks are going to be moving towards a direction, and I think a lot of times they're going to be moving towards Abdul Carter.
Yeah,
which again is scary. All right, finally is Ashton Genty, over under 1,050.5 rushing yards.
Yes, purely because of the scheme. I mean, Geno Smith, Geno Smith will be throwing the ball a lot, but I mean, let's be clear. This is a Pete Carroll offense where he specifically came in with the vision all along, which really we know at the time, but obviously 100% sure now in hindsight that this is the vision he wanted to implement. He's going to get the touches. Yeah. Really, the only concern here would be health. That's it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. I think that, he's obviously going to have the opportunity to do so. And just, again, by the nature of his scheme, like, I think if he can average, like, I think there's a chance where he can average like 3.5 yards per carry and still make the over.
Yeah, which is crazy. And probably isn't even the best for the Raiders, but it's just purely for the reality of this bet. Yeah.
Yeah, like, which is not good if you don't know. 3.5 yards per carry is not a good number, but I think that he might have that many carries at the end of the season.
Probably.
Alrighty, well, that's it. I think we're doing good.
Alrighty, Adam, do you have any players that you want our fans and listeners to watch highlights of?
Let me think. Well, we've talked a lot about quarterbacks. You know what? Let's say Dan Marino. Look up some Dan Marino highlights.
Incredible pick.
And, while you're at it, look at some highlights of some of the other top quarterbacks so that you can really, truly understand the difference and understand exactly what Dan Marino was doing for that era of football.
Yeah, that is a great suggestion, Adam. Well, on that note, everyone, if you enjoyed the video, like and subscribe, rate us if you're on Spotify or Apple Music, and we will see you next week. Thanks for tuning in.
All right, see you guys later.